box that some people can access and others cannot.
It's also my journal, not my article.
I mean, it's irrelevant. It's irrelevant to characterize the quality of an article by a measure which doesn't apply to the article.
Yeah, but it is done anyway, and people even have to submit the sum of all their impact factor points when they apply for a position or so.
So for any page, you can go back as far as 90 days only?
No, you can go to anything like if you want to know about July in 2010, you go there, and
can you access this programmatically?
Yes, but this is one of the reasons why the server is so slow. Many people do that.
Because in the PLOS webpage, they have shown you the access time for a particular article, right? And they're just saying that there is a new initiative where you have the topic papers and review papers, and they convert that into Wikipedia pages. And then on the Wikipedia side, we actually don't show that the access or any of the old metrics.
No, basically because if we would show this to the public today, we have lots of spammers. Loads of modifications to the site are just spam or vandalism, and then being reverted. And so if you would advertise this somewhere very prominent, you would get people who just play around with that. We don't want this at the moment. So this is a rather reliable measure. It gets played around with occasionally, but this is then visible, because if you have the record for several years for this article and suddenly it jumps to several million, something is wrong. Sometimes this actually shows a pattern, like when Michael Jackson died, on that same day you had something like 5 million hits to that article. And things like the tsunami in Japan also had on the order of several million hits a day. Although before that, tsunamis and so had something like hundreds of hits. So several orders of magnitude can be explained sometimes, but usually then it's really on the major news and everybody will know about it. So this isn't really a problem. Okay, trying to go back to the talk. Yeah, I'm aware that I need to wrap up. It's loading slowly here. Okay, once we're done with the old metrics, I would just like to present an idea about the journal of the future that is very dear to my heart, which basically tries to take the lessons that we've learned from Wikipedia and other collaborative environments, particularly with the public version history, because that's kind of a game changer in my view, and then apply this to how we design scholarly communication for the future. First, a few citations to motivate the whole thing. Like, there is no way to really publish the workflows that led to certain research, or that certain research consisted of, and thinking outside of the paper doesn't come naturally, and so on. What I like most is science is already a wiki if you look at it a certain way, because someone has found out something, they publish it. They publish it somewhere, not really where you would look for it, but somewhere, and if you're lucky you will find it. But on the wiki, like Wikipedia, you would really, it is predetermined basically where you would publish that. So if there is an article about the chimpanzee and you've done research about the chimpanzees in Africa, it would go to chimpanzee in Africa or sub-articles thereof, and everybody would look for that there, and not elsewhere, or else of you. And so that's one thing. So there is a list of criteria. They were drafted on a wiki, on Wikiversity, which allows original research. And those criteria are basically communication should not be by static documents, but it should be dynamic documents, updatable. Then scope should not be limiting as much as it does now, like Journal of Forensic Economics or whatever is very limiting and excludes anything about ice sheets or so, for instance. But in an electronic environment, this is not a real reason to reject a paper, that it doesn't fit into the scope. It was the major reason for me. Most of my rejections had this, doesn't fit into the scope of the journal. I hate that phrase. Then access, of course, research should be accessible, otherwise it doesn't really help advancing knowledge. Research should be replicable. Then there should be, reviews should be transparent, so also the reviews should be public, which is still not the case with most journals. Then presentation should be improved, so like including multimedia and stuff, whatever material is available, and also improving the interlinking of information. Then transparency of conflicts of interest. There's actually a panel tomorrow at Wikimedia specifically about financial conflicts of interest relating to health research. Then sustainability, the business model should certainly be sustainable for those who operate this kind of publishing platform. And flexibility, knowing that you can't get all of this at once, you have to be flexible when prioritizing what to go for. Then one first step in this direction is the topic pages that I already showed you, so glad that we can skip that one. Next thing is a proposal called a Wiki Journal, which basically tries to make this a bit more systematic. Like, the Wikimedia Foundation supports a lot of research, basically about wikis, not just Wikipedia, but wikis. And this support is sometimes financial, sometimes by providing access to information that is normally hidden. For instance, if you want to study what articles get deleted on Wikipedia, you don't normally have access. The foundation can provide access, and in exchange for getting this access, researchers are normally prepared to provide something, and we normally demand open access to the papers and to the data. And since we have a lot of such research going on now, we're thinking about basically acting a wiki as a repository of such articles. And once we have a repository that is editable, it's not so far from thinking of it as a journal. So there's no real distinction. Then the Encyclopedia of Original Research is a project that I worked on, which was actually the reason why Chris got to know me online, which tries to actually build an encyclopedia around scholarly topics, the way Wikipedia works, but individual articles are editable and forkable, not just editable as in Wikipedia, but also forkable as in GitHub, and they all have a public version history. That's the main idea, and this would then have a lot of implications in the community of people who would use this tool. It would actually help interact. It would also provide a platform for new scientists to show off what they know about a certain topic, because if they have, just imagine you're a new young scientist entering a field, and you can tell to your professor with confidence, I wrote that Wikipedia article about that topic, and the professor can actually check it, and it's good. That's a recommendation, probably better than any letter from somewhere, or even a diploma from somewhere that you cannot really judge. So I have a video that I'd like to show that, but we don't have a lot of time, so I'll skip it for the moment. JATS to MediaWiki converter. Now we're getting back to something that some of you probably know better than me. So JATS is the format in which PubMed Central publishes the XML of the articles that come from the publishers. The publishers do not always provide really pure XML, don't follow all the standards, but it's roughly homogeneous corpus. And we're now in the process of writing a converter from that XML to MediaWiki XML, such that it is easier to set up a wiki that contains all those articles, and we would start with the review articles. There are on the order of 60,000 review articles in that subset, which would make a decent Wikipedia for scholarly purposes. And here is actually, if you want to try out that converter, here's the code.
Who's working on that?
Me and him and a few others.
On GitHub?
Yeah, it's all on GitHub, yeah. The code here, it's linked from here. And there's a blog post by Chris that describes how it all works, and we have a few test pages, like this test page has been imported from PMC directly into Chris' home wiki without images. Images are
this article doesn't have images. That's why I picked it.
Anyway, the images are then being brought in via the open access media importer, because once we have a routine for importing supplementary materials, it's not a big change to also import the figures from the article. So that's something we're working on. Then citing version documents is something that I already mentioned briefly, and there are also some tools like CiteDUI. So if you look at the source code of this page, here this is the article Pennevedal, the third item here. if you look at how it is coded, it is just cite DUI, and then you give the DUI, and a robot will then go and pull that from Crossref. So that's a number of tools that facilitate editing. And I have a number of further nodes. For instance, how can non-written knowledge be cited? There is a lot of knowledge in cultures for which either no script exists or for which writing is very unpopular as compared to the overall population. But there is still a lot of knowledge, especially about indigenous plants or recipes and how to use plants for certain things. And so there is a project on how to cite those things, and basically video is the way to go. And people can speak in whatever language they speak, and they describe the things in their own terms. This is then hard to edit, but yeah, it's better than nothing. Then we have a research newsletter. There is a research committee that works on matters. If you want to do some research about wikis or Wikipedia, then you would have to go through that committee. Then there's the WikiGenes project, which actually allows it to find out who wrote what in such a wiki article. Topic pages already mentioned. Then things like taxonomy. Sometimes people ask themselves, well, why do we do things? And if you then go to category, somehow this didn't work. Here, maybe. Anyway, the taxonomies here, they're often from NCBI. I meant to link to a page which actually linked to NCBI somehow. Maybe someone edited it during the time. Yeah, or maybe I just made a mistake with the link. And then there's HubMed that you are probably familiar with, that provides kind of article alerts if something new comes out in a traditional way. And then you can just compare this to the recent changes feed of the English Wikipedia, or a visualization of the recent changes across all Wikipedias. So this is the recent changes that have been happening in the English Wikipedia during the last minute, basically. 2 minutes, 3 minutes, on that order. So roughly 100, 200 edits per minute on the English Wikipedia. Few of them are to science, so if you do the same for the category science, it's just, well, maybe 10 per minute or so, or maybe 5, something like this. And maybe your network is too slow for really visualizing this. I recommend having a look at this once you're at home with a decent network. And what it shows is actually the number of edits, or the articles that are being edited right now. So you had in English James Dean, yeah, and then you had Portuguese, Swedish, French, German, and so on. And on the background you have some images that have been uploaded to the image repository, and it's all basically in real time. And watching this for just a few minutes is amazing in my view. Then there is Federated Wiki that you may have heard of, which actually tries to combine the wiki concept of making pages or web documents editable, combine it with the forkability. So it goes into the direction of the Encyclopedia of Research Plan. And then I have a few links to my publications and videos if you want to continue in that direction. I'm also happy to talk about that. I have a summary. That is basically, NCBI is currently one of the largest platforms for biotechnology information. It has heaps of free content waiting for reuse, and much of it is already reused, but there is potential to increase that. It does not yet harness the potential of its large user base, basically at all. So whenever there is anything wrong with NCBI, I have a hard time finding out whom to tell about that. I've tried it several times, and also feature suggestions, like I've long suggested search by license in PubMed. Then after a while I was told it's not easy to implement, basically because the publishers don't provide proper XML. Now I've seen the XML, I understand it. And Wikimedia is currently the largest platform for free knowledge in general. It hosts large amounts also of biotechnology information and systematically links out to other sources, including NCBI. I actually had a few slides on that. We link to mesh terms, we link to gene reviews and so on, systematically from those info boxes. And so in some sense, if you're the National Center for Biotechnology Information, Wikipedia could be considered a global center for biotechnology information. I hope this generates some discussion. And then the main question is, how can we enhance interaction between the two? Thank you.
I was curious, what is the level of support on an annual basis for the Wikipedia Foundation and any long-term commitments from large funders?
Long-term means 3 years at most, I think. There was something like 3 years from Sloan, on the order of 2 million or so. That's the longest that I'm aware of. Most of the funding comes in via the annual funding drive at the end of the year. Usually throughout December, you see Jimmy Wales figuring on every Wikipedia page and asking for your money. And this money has grown more or less exponentially over the last few years. So something like 5 years ago, they had a budget of 5 million or so. Last year it was 30 million, the funding drive. I don't know what it is supposed to be this year, maybe 40, 50, may well be. And so far they've always got more than they asked for. So this kind of speaks to the utility of the tools that they provide.
So at the Wikipedia page, let's say one page can be linked by another Wikipedia page, right? Do we know which is the source that this page was written? Which is the referral?
Can one wiki page cite another wiki page as its source?
No. Wikipedia is not a reliable source, so there is, you're not supposed to cite unreliable sources. Basically, since there is no way to know whether a certain editor knows something about the subject that they're editing, because many editors are using pseudonyms or they are editing under their IP, which doesn't really show whether you have any idea about the topic. So since that is the case, there are all sorts of rules that delegate expertise to external sources. So if there is an official publication or technical report by NCBI that covers the point I want to make, I can cite that. But I can't cite, my friend has written that report, I know him.
That helps to prevent cytogenesis, right? Where you
Yeah. It helps to prevent a whole sort of thing, but it really doesn't work badly in cases like biography of scientists, where you really have basically nothing that is citable. So, and that would also be something that publishers and maybe institutions should think about. If there is an official web page maintained by someone other than the scientist in question, then this becomes a citable resource. If it's maintained, and obviously maintained by the scientist himself, then it's not citable in that sense. And most of the departmental pages, they visibly just take whatever the scientist has given them, and so that's also not really citable. So it would be good to feature some of your scientists on a regular basis, or collaborate with newspapers, whatever, or even with journals. There are many journals that have a small biography box at the end, which present those who have contributed to the article. Most of those journals are unfortunately closed access, and so we can't use that. We also can't use the images.
I don't think I made that clear. Let me try it again. Let's say you have 3 pages, okay, A, B, and C, and all wiki pages, okay. And in both A and B, there's a link to page 3, page C, and there are 100 times page C was accessed. Do we know? And because of either people visit page A or page B, okay.
They could have come to C directly.
Yeah, but I'm saying is, let's say those 100 times people come to C because of A or B. Do we know how many are from A or how many from B?
In principle, this information could be tracked. I think it is not being tracked right now.
It's interesting, that would be interesting.
Well, I should show you the Wikistats. That is, there is a large resource about all things you would eventually like to know about Wikipedia. So you have all sorts of growth per language edition here with nice bubbles and so on. Maybe you could go for the mobile issue, because I found that one very interesting. Here, mobile site only. Because they have all growth rates on the order of between 100 and 500% or so. per year between this June and last June. So that's really dramatic growth. Look at those curves here. And yeah, we have all sorts of data, but we don't trace such data mainly for reasons of privacy. So we also don't keep the IPs. If you're logged in with your user account, I'm logged in right now, then the IP that I'm using to access Wikipedia is not being stored in any way. If I'm not logged in and use then basically an anonymous account, that IP goes directly into the version
connection
history.
between fields that you get between pages from a refer log where it's only interesting aggregated in reasonable numbers, that wouldn't have privacy issues.
Well, I don't know. I'm not involved with that, but I think this has not been gathered yet.
But I just missed. I think David asked a question. Can we have that programmatic access to the access times that you showed?
Yeah, but it is one of the problems that is not solved in an ideal fashion yet. And
well.
people are aware that today is a hackathon. It's one of the items on the to-do list. I don't know whether anybody worked on that because it's a fun project. You know, so it would really help if someone would go there and say, okay, we have a grant of 5,000 whatever, and then do this in 1 or 2 months or so. It is doable. It's not a big deal, but the way it is organized now is basically the same as it was written in 2005 or so. And since then, the programmatic access has increased enormously, roughly exponentially, as basically anything. And so the original configuration is simply not suitable. I don't understand the details. I just see the effect that the server crashes frequently.
Well, I want to thank you very much. I know that there's going to be folks having lunch with you and discussing. Unfortunately, I have a meeting fairly soon, which it looks like I'm going to end up being late to. But so I won't be able to join you. We really are interested in kind of figuring out ways we can interact more productively with Wikipedia, so I know there's some individuals here. Chris, Hilda's going actually to the Wikimedia meeting. Who else are you going with?
We're going to go a couple days, tomorrow and Saturday.
Yeah. So, we hope through various channels that we can kind of broaden and deepen our interactions. I think it's incredibly, it's an amazing thing what Wikipedia has become, and I use it all the time. And whatever criticisms people have about weaknesses or whatever, it's an amazingly useful resource, and I think we would like to make sure that the information that we have works its way in a useful way.
Okay, there's one thing I haven't mentioned yet. That's the concept of a Wikimedian in residence. We now do this with many GLAM institutions. GLAM stands for galleries, libraries, archives, and museums. And so there's one experienced Wikimedian who goes to that, basically sits there, has an office there, as a normal contributor to those institutions, and improves articles around the topic that the institution cares about, and also helps providing materials to Wikimedia. Like there's the National Archives here. They have one, and they have provided on the order of 100,000 documents from the National Archives onto Wikimedia Commons and onto Wikisource. And there was a Wikimedian residence at the Smithsonian, where they have provided also loads of images and improved loads of articles. And having something like this with a scientific institution is lacking, in my view. And it would be cool to do something like this with you.
Something we'll try to learn more about and look into. I think it's a good idea. Absolutely.
Good. So thanks
Okay,
for hosting me.
thanks.
Thanks for coming.
Some of us will be going down to lunch in the cafeteria. If anybody wants to join, feel free.